Welcome to Heaven Awaits. My name is Leigh, and I narrate the near-death experiences of those who have died and have seen the other side. If you enjoy these videos, please consider hitting the thumbs up, subscribe, and bell icons to be notified of new content. Doing so is free, and it does help the channel grow. Get comfortable, grab a cup of coffee or tea, and let's dive into today's experience. I was asked to share my near-death experience and need to disclose a trigger warning. There's a good message at the end as well, but this is a bit of a long read. Here's my death experience, which led to nightmares that would haunt me for the next 24 years. This search has led me to become an unconscious mind coach and mental health hypnotherapist today. I was an Australian Navy clearance diver, working with the Australian Special Air Service Regiment. I drowned in the Antarctic Ocean at 2 a.m. in 17-meter seas. After coming back, I suffered hypothermia, as my body was between 33 to 34 degrees Celsius. The next day, about 6 hours later, I jumped onto a Sea King helicopter and continued our mission. We were boarding illegal vessels in Antarctic waters. It was almost as if nothing happened because that's how we were trained. It wasn't until around 12 years later that I started getting struck down with uncontrollable panic attacks. Small things triggered my mind, so my body began going through the same intense panic that occurred 12 years ago. I experienced the moment of no return in the blackness of the freezing Antarctic waters. Here's my version of events which were later substantiated in Navy officer reports. It was so cold that when the waves struck the hull of the ship, the water instantly froze. It looked like it was snowing upwards as the frosted water smashed over the top of the Navy frigate. The time was approximately 2 a.m. and it was pitch black. The seas, I am told, were around 17 meters high. They were higher than the frigate itself, and you could see the ship vanish behind the waves. The Navy frigate was like a cork bobbing around in the unforgiving ocean. On my night to remember, we were fast roping off the bridge deck of an Australian frigate into a rigid inflatable boat that was being pulled alongside the frigate after being lowered into the water. The fast rope is a thick rope, approximately 10 centimeters thick, and it guides you very quickly out of a helicopter or into a boat being pulled alongside a ship. This way, we didn't have to climb down a ladder, and it is a much faster way to load soldiers. However, due to the rope being wet and frosted with the cold, we were unable to stop midway down, so we just fell controllably downwards, if that makes sense. The first load of our military assault group had all plunged down the rope into the first rib and had unhooked the shackle at the front of the boat which was towing them alongside the frigate. They then proceeded to the rear of the ship and followed behind until the second rib had been loaded. We were all going to the illegal vessel under the cover of darkness and the massive sea swell. As luck would have it, I was the first assault team member to plummet down the fast rope into the second inflatable boat being pulled alongside the frigate. I looked down the side of the ship from the bridge deck and saw that approximately 30 feet below, the boat had come alongside. The bowman, the fellow at the front, was raising his thumb to signal that he had hooked up the shackle to the rope and was now being pulled alongside the frigate. I climbed over the rails, grabbed the thick, fast rope, and plummeted down it towards the inflatable boat alongside. It's also important to note that I was wearing a full thermal snowsuit, snow boots, a backpack containing 3 days' rations, a sledgehammer to beat in locked doors on any illegal vessel to gain entry, plus firearms, weapons, and ammunition as needed should we be met with resistance on board the vessel we were about to board. I was halfway down the rope when a huge wave crashes against the hull of the Navy frigate. The inflatable boat was pushed away from the hull, and the shackle at the front of the rib snapped, causing the rib to slip backward and outwards from the frigate's hull. I slid into the Antarctic Ocean, hanging onto the thick rope as the frigate was going about 10 knots. I looked over my left shoulder and saw that the driver of the rib was now driving it alongside the ship, keeping up with it just so the bow of the rib was about an arm's length from me as I was being bashed against the hull of the ship and being dragged through the sea swell. In short, I was being pulled alongside the ship at about 10 knots and hanging onto the rope in freezing conditions with all my equipment on. The bowman was screaming at me to grab hold of the thin ropes on the top of the rib, so I reached out and grabbed hold of the thin ropes around the inflatable. This meant I was dragging under the rib at the same speed of about 10 knots. The bowman was yelling at me to not let go, but I couldn't hang on. I was sucked under the water. The water was so cold that when my head went under, I gasped and ended up inhaling a lot of water, which froze my throat. I popped up to the surface as I was being sucked into the hull of the frigate. I looked up and saw other military personnel running along the deck of the ship screaming out, "Man overboard!" I kept pushing myself out from the hull of the ship as my main concern was being sucked under the ship. The wake of the ship kept sucking me into the side of the hull. I looked down the length of the ship and saw the foaming fury of the waves being made by the propellers of the ship. A massive panic came over me, as I thought I was going to be chopped up by the huge propellers that rotated in towards the center of the ship as it pushed through the water. When the foaming waves at the stern of the ship reached me, I got sucked under the ship. This sent me to the middle of the hull where I kicked and screamed in an absolute, uncontrollable panic. I felt my right boot connect with the hard hull of the ship, so I pushed out with all my strength, and luckily I popped out the back of the surging waves and saw the ship sailing away in the darkness. I recall absolute relief as I watched the ship sail away, as I hadn't been chopped up by the propellers. It was then that I heard the first inflatable boat's crew yelling that they could see me in the darkness. My snowsuit was bright orange. They were yelling that they were coming to pick me up. I looked around and saw the boat surfing down a wave, totally out of control and towards me. The boat ran straight over me, smashing into my head and forcing me under the water. Again, I panicked and thrust my arms and legs as hard as I could towards the surface and began treading water in the freezing ocean. When I got to the surface, I then heard the crew of the second inflatable boat yelling out to me that they would grab me and pick me up. I looked around in the darkness and saw them. The same as the first boat. They were surfing uncontrollably down the huge waves, and they also ran over me, striking my head and arms. This forced me under the water again, where I was starting to struggle to get back up to the surface. I continued thrashing around to get back up to the surface of the water, but by now, the cold water, the weight of my snowsuit, and my weighted backpack were making it harder and harder to get back up to the surface. My body was beginning to go into shock as my blood started concentrating on my organs instead of pushing them out to my arms and legs. I was now drifting downwards into the black ocean, which felt as if it was freezing my eyeballs and my throat as I gulped down more and more water into my lungs. The panic was hard to describe. My body went into a severe fight mode to stay alive. I kept my eyes open as I continued sinking as I stared into the blackness. I also kept inhaling the freezing water and remembered everything slowly turning from extreme cold to becoming really warm inside me. It was as if the blackness began covering me like a warm blanket. I still remember the total calmness that came over me as I kept inhaling the blackness all around, which now also began to feel as if it was filling me up from the inside. I actually felt as if I was drifting off into a lovely deep sleep. It was as if a thick, black liquid began to cover my eyes and was slowly making its way around the outside of my body and the inside of my brain. I began feeling like I was actually flying in the blackness, with a calmness and peacefulness becoming my entire existence. I began the transition from my body's physical mass into nothingness, but there was also an amazing home-like welcoming feeling of being loved. I felt surrounded by people who loved me and that I also loved, but they were people I actually didn't know in this life. What happened next was nothing short of incredible. The first rib crew had seen me go under, so maneuvered the boat over me in the massive sea swell. The crew then formed a human chain of 3 personnel into the water, and one of the crew thrashed around in the blackness of the ocean and miraculously grabbed my right arm as I was drifting down into the blackness. They then pulled me back into the boat and onto the deck, where I came back to consciousness and began coughing up all the water I had inhaled and swallowed. It was as if time had stopped over the last 10 minutes, and everything felt as if it was going normal. It was as if what I'd gone through didn't even happen. I felt an incredible clarity of everything around me. It was as if the black sky separated from the black water, and all the colors seemed in the highest definition. It's very important for a person who has been subjected to severe cold to stay still, so the warmth their body generates by moving their limbs is kept around their vital organs. However, there I was standing up and yelling at everyone to, "Come on, let's go and get this illegal boat." The call came back from the Navy frigate to get me back on board to see if I had been injured in the event. I was put back on my original rib and taken back on board the frigate. I was dressed up in my snowsuit, boots, backpack, etc. in the wardroom while military nurses and doctors undressed me to get the cold, wet clothes off. I could feel the mood in the room was very tense, as everyone was worried that I was about to go into shock from hypothermia. My body temperature was bordering on death at around 33 to 34 degrees Celsius. I blacked out and collapsed, so I was placed on my back on the carpeted floor with a plastic blanket put over me. A machine began pumping warm air into the blanket to slowly allow my blood to be distributed from around my organs to my extremities without shocking my organs. I must have transitioned again from my body into the other side, or maybe it was in between both sides. I vividly remember being surrounded by the blackness again, with so much love around me and inside of me. I remember being confused at this time because all I could hear was the softest, most beautiful guiding voice coming from outside of the blackness. It's strange to try and remember the feeling, but it was like I was given a soft push through the darkness towards the beautiful voice, which was telling me everything would be okay. I still remember that soothing, loving voice saying, "Come to me, darling. It's okay. Come to me, over here." The voice kept saying the same thing over and over for what I thought may have been about 15 to 20 times. I began feeling a soft, warm hand holding mine with another warm hand, stroking the top of my hand as I slowly began drifting back into self-consciousness. The lovely voice from the blackness in my mind was then sort of transported into reality. A female officer was sitting next to me on the floor saying, "It's all okay now. Come here and wake up now. It's time to wake up." My vital signs had started getting stronger, and after what seemed many hours had gotten back to normal. 6 hours later, we were boarding another vessel as if nothing had happened. As I mentioned before, about 12 years later, I had begun to experience panic attacks whenever I found myself in a place where I could not see an exit, such as car parks, shopping centers, etc. This then led to anxiety, depression, PTSD triggering attacks, and self-doubt, until I found hypnotherapy and unconscious healing that allowed me to go back to the moments this all happened and coach myself through it. It worked so well that I created my own mental health business. So now I spend every day assisting people all over the world to overcome the unconscious emotions that they had attached to negative events in their past. What I've learned through all of this is that no matter how big or how small we think our past traumas are, at the time we experience them, they were so powerful to the person going through them that they can be affected many years after the event. So stay strong and believe there is a way that you can let go of those debilitating emotions from your past that are limiting your happiness today. That does it for today's experience. As always, let me know what you thought in the comment section below. Until next time, stay safe and continue to be blessed.